So a lot of people are always asking several questions about the dissertation. What do I do? How do I go about it? How do I write it and start? So in this set of slides prepared by us at the Research Center, we're going to make sure that you understand the basics of dissertation writing. So the first thing we want to talk about is the structure of your dissertation. Sometimes you find normally the dissertation is comprised of 5 chapters. The first one usually dwells on the introduction to the study. The next one is about the literature review, methodology, presentation and discussion of results, summary, conclusions and recommendations. But in general you find that some institutions just have variations of this. For example, some might say on your literature review they split it into theoretical and then empirical literature review. Some might split the presentation and discussion of results, whereby they just say in another chapter you present results and in another chapter you discuss them. Others may split the 5th chapter and say in one chapter you do the summary and in the conclusions, then the recommendations can be another chapter, but you realize that usually it's just one and the same thing. So when you come to the first chapter, which is basically your introductory chapter or your background of the study, in this chapter usually you are introducing your study, what is the title, what is it about, then you discuss the background information, what is it that leads to the current problem that is under investigation, and from this problem statement where you are stating what is it that your study is trying to find and to fill, then the next you go to the justification where you are saying this is my reason for doing this study. Then the next thing you usually touch on in this chapter is you go to the presentation of the research questions and objectives, depending on the structure of your institution, but some would just want you to tell them your hypothesis that you're going to be testing. That is, if you're going to be doing hypothesis testing in your study. Then the next you might present some key assumptions related to your study, because every time we do a study there are always some assumptions that underlie the study. Then you might want to also define some key terms and how your study will be organized all in whole. Then when you move to the second chapter, which is the literature review, of course you begin by introducing it, then you now discuss the theories that you applied or that are relevant to your area of study. These theories, which is called the theoretical framework, are important when you're going to be analyzing your findings, especially when you're doing a qualitative dissertation. Then the next you discuss subsections in line with your research objectives, where you are trying to expound or to show out the research gaps, is where you say Smith, for example, Smith 2014 discussed this topic, but is the strengths of his study with this, the weaknesses of this study with that. Then you cross-reference Smith against Liddy or against another authority until you make sure that the research gaps or what your study is trying to fill out has come out properly. Then you conclude the chapter. Or some would want you to put a conceptual framework, which is more like a theoretical framework, but a concept is what you are saying. This is how I'm explaining my independent against dependent variables in the study. Then that usually concludes the chapter. One thing I can say is make sure your literature is relevant, it is recent, and it makes sense. Then we can go to the third chapter, which is your research methodology. In this chapter we normally discuss everything else about how you are going to do your study, things like the research paradigm, discussions of the philosophy of your study. Then you might want to talk about the population and how you are sampling, the sample size, sampling frame, the sampling procedures or methods in which you are going to make sure that your population is manageable enough for your study. Then you also present and justify research instruments. A lot of people have a problem of just presenting them. You need to justify and say out why you chose this over that. Then you need to also talk about the nature and sources of data that you are going to be collecting, as well as the data collection procedures, as well as data analysis procedures. Then you might want to talk about the validity and reliability or trustworthiness of your data. In some cases where you are dealing with qualitative, you want to talk of trustworthiness there. Then if it's quanti, then you want to talk of validity and reliability. How are you going to measure to make sure that the findings you have really mean what they mean? Then you might want to also add something about ethical considerations, because research ethics is an emerging and important discipline that you need to take into account when you're doing your research. Then you might then we go to the fourth chapter, which is basically results. A lot of people call this chapter in different ways. Some say analysis of results, analysis of findings, presentation and discussion, interpretation of results, findings, so but basically it's one and the same. It's all about the results or the data from the study. So in this chapter you might want to begin by analyzing the response rates that you obtain from the use of research instruments in a study. You might want to put a section on demographic details, especially if these are related to your study. Then you might also want to present in line with the findings of your research according to your research objectives or the answers to your research questions, where we usually advise that you do this format by first presenting, that is you are just showing us what you found out, then you are interpreting it. In other words, you're now saying what are the reasons for those findings. Then in the discussion you're now comparing that against the theoretical framework which you discussed in chapter 2, as well as the literature. So basically it's quite a simple chapter, although many people have problems, especially when it comes to the data analysis there. So that is chapter 4. Then when you go to chapter 5, which is summary, conclusions and recommendations, basically the summary is all about you're just giving us what people want to usually summarize, either the major findings of the study, or maybe want to summarize the entire study, what was involved in it, what was it about. Then we go to the conclusions, which normally we suggest you conclude in relation to your research objectives and questions, where you're saying, from this research question, this is what I found out, this research question, this is what I found out. Then you make sure you put some recommendations which make sense in line with your conclusions there, and which also makes sense in terms of the methodology and the literature or theory that underlines the study. Then other people might also want to include a section on descriptions of areas for further study, where you're saying future researchers should focus on this because this study failed to cover this because of the reason so. So basically that is all that is involved in the research process. My name is Botho. I'm from the Research Center or the Dissertation Center. On Facebook you can find us as the Dissertation Center Zimbabwe, and then on our website is www.theresearchcenter.co.zw, and you can use that number, maybe dial it or maybe try to find it on WhatsApp, on such ways of contact. But basically I thank you for enjoying this. I do hope you make time to watch the other slides that we are talking about in terms of each chapter and what is involved. Thank you.